Hello there, my friend. Welcome to another episode of Talk Music Talk with Boyce. I am Boyce, and this is my podcast that you are listening to. Talk Music Talk is a weekly music interview podcast where I have long-form conversations with people connected to music from different genres and different backgrounds, established and emerging, performers, music therapists, music journalists, and on this episode, it is the return of Sarah Elizabeth Charles, vocalist, composer, and one of my favorite entertainers. This is our third conversation together, not fourth, as we say in this interview. I first interviewed her 2 years ago, twice actually, on episode 21 and episode 36. The first time I talked to her was on the eve of her second album, Inner Dialogue. The second time I talked to her was on the eve of her first headline performance at Blue Note here in New York City. In that time, I have become a fanboy, super fan. I think I have seen her around 24 times. I have lost count. I believe that she is more than a vocalist and a composer. I'm going to say that she is an inventor because I have never seen her perform a song the same way twice. I guarantee it. This new interview is on the eve of another phenomenal album, her third. It is called Free of Form, co-produced with trumpet player Christian Atunde Adjuah Scott, aka Christian Scott. Also plays 4 songs on the album. It is out this week on Christian Stretch Music label. We recorded this interview prior to its release, so we are talking about it in future tense. This is another great conversation with Sarah. We talk about genre and the necessity to label or not. We talk about her coming from the jazz tradition. We talk about being fearless and the benefits of it. And of course, we talk about the making of and the concept behind the album, Free of Form. And you will hear 2 songs from it, the title track and also March to Revolution Part 2. And both songs feature the amazing Christian Scott on them. A great conversation with great music. I know you will enjoy it. Here it is, without further ado, my interview with Sarah Elizabeth Charles. One of the things, I hate describing genres or like when someone says, oh, what genre of music? So I get asked that question a lot, right?
Yeah.
So when I would recommend you in the past, I would say, oh, she's a jazz vocalist and be done with it, right? And that would give people something. But I feel with the new album, Free of Form, I don't know what I would say. So what was the road to that? How intentional was that? It's jazz and more.
Yeah, I mean, even our last record, Inner Dialogue, we called it jazz soul.
Yeah.
So I think that, I think fundamentally I am a jazz vocalist. That's how I was trained. That's the tradition that my creativity was birthed in.
Yeah.
So I'm absolutely still a jazz vocalist. But it was interesting. I read the downbeat poll for rising jazz vocalist that Becca Stevens won. Okay. And she was so candid and wonderful about her origin and her place of origin within the jazz tradition and jazz study. She also had many other types of genres that she was exposed to as a kid and that she grew up listening to and was inspired by. But it was kind of like a, type moment for her because it was like, well, okay, yeah, I guess I am a jazz vocalist. She considers herself, I think, to be so much. Yeah. But jazz is fundamentally rooted in her and was a huge part of her formation and identity. So I can definitely identify with that when I think about someone like Becca. Yeah. I think that my music will always fundamentally be rooted in the jazz tradition in different ways. Now, this album is absolutely not a straight ahead jazz album, but nor were my other 2. And they were considered jazz as well. And depending on who you talk to, that's the never ending debate. But I don't know, at this point in my journey, I feel like instead of trying to figure out or define exactly what I want to call things, I just want to create things. And if you hear me and you say, oh, wow, she sounds like a jazz vocalist, cool. If you hear me and you say, oh, wow, she sounds like a neo soul artist, then cool. people are going to hear and have different impressions of me and my sound based upon their own experience. It's subjective. I can only speak to my influence, and jazz has had a huge amount to do with the influence and inspiration that I draw from creating my music.
And that's the problem with the labels, because it doesn't really necessarily tell you anything.
But it does help to define for our audience, right? So as artists, we're like, don't put me in a box. Don't define me, and we say we want so much from our audience. But at the same time, context is important. So, and I think that's where this label of stretch music is so helpful. Because it really takes into account all of the different genres that us as artists, we spoke about this in my last interview with you, that us as artists growing up in the 70s, late 70s, 80s, 90s, all of the different genres that inspired us, in addition to studying the tradition. And in addition to studying jazz and classical music and all of this music that had been created before we were even a thought to the universe, So I just think it's inevitable. Everything that's happening now in terms of pushing the music forward, creating new genres, new sounds, new subgenres of genres, it's inevitable, and it's going to keep on getting deep. But I do think it's important to come up with names for context for our audience.
And some people need names.
I think it's helpful. It can be helpful. So I'm okay with talking about it. But I'm really curious to see what my audience thinks and how my audience, who knows me so well, I listened to my record with my father, and he said, well, Sarah, I know it's you, but it's a different side of you. He's like, I've never heard you sound like this before. So that was cool because, somebody like my dad has been listening to me since I was a little girl. And so I'm really excited to hear what people who know me think and feel when they hear this record, and also what type of new audience it might draw in because of the fact that we have now jumped off the cliff and are soaring. That's how I see it.
It feels like a broadening extension. It doesn't feel like you've made this sharp right turn. It really does feel like, okay, this is a natural evolution from the last album.
I think so. And I think if anything, I'm curious. I'm not quite sure what the next project is going to sound like. And the next album might be with Scope, with my band, but it might also be something else that I put out under my own name. So I'm just excited about the limitless possibilities. We can really go and recreate ourselves as artists however and wherever we want. And if we don't limit ourselves, it's just going to help us to expand and to have longevity in our creative journey.
And how did you get to that point from Inner Dialogue to this one, to just open yourself up and not feel constrained, or I got to stay in the jazz tradition, or what people expect of a traditional jazz singer?
I think it's a really good question. I think that there have been a lot of factors that have helped me kind of get to the point where I'm like, you know what? I value people's opinions, but I need to make these decisions for myself, and I need to be fearless in my approach and what I do. But rewinding back to the time when I still wanted to be a straight ahead jazz vocalist and exist, in the scene in that way. Once I realized that my voice wasn't necessarily conducive to that, and that I really wanted to compose and write more, and create more new music. I think that commitment started this journey, and this sort of place where I am now has been inevitable and necessary. Now I've met people along the way, my bandmates, Jesse, John, Bernice, who have pushed me and said, no, don't apologize. Just keep doing what you're doing. Let's keep doing what we're doing and building what we're building. And then involving Christian Scott, really kind of gave me that confidence, and also made me realize how necessary it is to be fearless now. Not to say, oh yeah, I'll put it off and eventually I'll get there. But I'm going to sort of walk on eggshells right now. No, if now is the time to do everything. Now is the time to build. Now is the time to take action and to not be afraid to do so. So I think I just kept finding people in my path and in my journey who were validating that approach. And the universe seemed to be saying, like, hello, Sarah, like, let's do this. We're ready when you are. So yeah, it's becoming more exciting than scary.
Okay, that's
for
a good
me,
place.
and that feels really good, because for a while it was very scary, and now I'm just like, you know what? I care so much that I don't care. If that makes sense.
Okay, yeah. So scary because of what the jazz fan may think of the new direction that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would challenge anyone to find an artist that truly does not care about what anybody thinks, even if it's just that one person, or even if it's just you. You know, we have in the process of our creation, we have sort of this. We're wrapped up in the idea or the thought of what someone else is going to think of what we do, or what we present or what we create, and that can be good, because then we're composing with the audience in mind, and we're thinking about that interaction, as we were talking about before, between audience and performer, and how that's an exchange. But at the same time, it can be really detrimental to what you actually choose to create, or what you create is what I'm trying to say. You choose to share.
Okay. Yes.
Because again, the fear can be wrapped up. There can be a lot of fear wrapped up in other people's impressions of what you do. And I think at some point you really just gotta go for it and put those things aside, and then bring them into the equation during the part of the process when it makes actual sense, which is when you're actually starting to present things and thinking about how you're going to convey your concept and your message. But in the process of like actual birthing, no, you just have to go for it. Because otherwise you're stunting yourself.
And how did, you've been performing the song, several of the songs like over the past year live. How did that shape the process of the songs? You're kind of like workshopping them, or?
Yeah, I think that's always been our process as a band. And me as a songwriter too, you know, I define only so much through my writing. You know, I define the harmony, I define the melody, I define the lyrical content, I define the form. As my new album title to the contrary, but I define the form to a certain extent. And I have an idea about the arrangement and the sounds that I want. But I don't define those as clearly. And because I feel like those are meant to be explored in the live setting with the particular musicians that I'm playing with at any given time. So certain songs like Change to Come and March to Revolution. What are some songs? I Will Wait. There are a bunch of songs that were the original songs that are a part of this new project that I started writing about 3 years ago, even, and that you've heard us perform many times. But they've taken on this new shape in the recorded context. Even March to Revolution, we released the single last fall, and now we have March to Revolution Part 2 that's on the record. It's sort of a pre-election and post-election version in juxtaposition. This version on the record is much more, I think, clear and a little bit more aggressive as well in the approach. Not in terms of actually attempting to provoke people in a negative way, but in the attempt to elicit a particular response and engage other people in a way that's very direct, as opposed to being slightly more passive, which is what part one kind of felt like to me anyway. But yeah, each of the songs, I think, that we've been performing for a long time, this has been our opportunity to document them with clarity, and within a context and a soundscape that makes sense with the rest of the repertoire too. So when we perform these songs live, depending on what else we're doing, they're going to sound different again. And that's kind of like, that's the nature of what scope is. It's about possibility. It's about moments. It's not about replication. So.
And does the does the songs change? Like, as an example, you do the show and then you feel a certain energy from the group, or things that you couldn't tell during rehearsal, you can pick out, oh, this isn't working live for a song.
Yeah, I think it was interesting recording the record and then taking a couple months and mixing, and then coming back together and playing a show in May, and then mastering, and then coming back together at the DC Jazz Fest. That was the first time that we came back together in June as a full band, with Jesse Elder, Bernice Earl Travis II, John Davis, and our new member, Jordan Peters, on guitar. So that was our first gig together as a new band, as 5 members now of Scope. And playing the music in that context made me realize that the form of the songs are all so familiar to all of us at this point that there's a fluidity that's really cool already built in. Whereas with the older songs on Inner Dialogue, like Bells and Breathe, we performed them pretty much, not verbatim, but very close to the record for a really long time. But at the DC Jazz Fest, even the title track, Free of Form, felt different already. Yeah. And that was cool. And I think that comes with, I mean, we've been together for 7 years. Jordan's been with us for months only. But there's a familiarity and also sort of a comfort as individuals in terms of where we're at creatively and what we have to offer. And there's sort of a clarity and a maturity that I think we've all acquired, which comes with age and experience. So we all get together, and even if we haven't played the music together in 3 months or 4 months or a month or a year, we kind of know what to do. It's like, let's just focus on the sound. And if we're focusing on the sound and we know the songs, then the possibilities are pretty much endless. Okay.
And as somebody coming from the jazz tradition, is it difficult knowing that the album will always be that? Like, because, like, say if you're a pop artist, the way you recorded for the album, when you do it live, you're most likely going to do it that way every single time. Yeah.
I think that's part of what ultimately makes this jazz to me. The swing rhythm is not necessarily ever present, although it's hinted at in many of the songs and the pieces. The harmonic context is as much borrowed from the jazz tradition as it is from soul and R&B and other styles, and folk even. Thinking of Another Cloudy Memory in particular. But ultimately the creation of it and the spirit of it is jazz, which is what, the songs are tunes in that sense to me, because we know the form, we know what's there, and then we're able to be so free with it. We're able to just get on stage and create within that context. And the only reason why we have that ability and those chops are because of our training in that, in the jazz tradition. So to me, no, it doesn't bother me. To me, it's an honor, It more so bothers me when people say, oh, well, Sarah's not a jazz vocalist. Not that I want to be limited to only being a jazz vocalist, because I think I sing and have been inspired by many different genres. But when people try to say that I'm not, I find it interesting, because I absolutely am. And I'm other things as well. Yeah. And I take a lot of pride in that. And I also take it very seriously. It's not something I'm flippant with. I'm not trying to take ownership of something that I don't feel invested in. I think that this tradition has been so rich. And I think the question that I'm just trying to answer, and to be honest, that I've been trying to answer since I was young, is just, what's next? I wrote a letter when I was 14 to Sheila Jordan saying, I was so concerned about the future of jazz. I was 14. It was ridiculous and also very, very poignant, I think. But I was probably in a very inarticulate way, expressing my fear that that the music wouldn't or couldn't be trusted to my generation. It's like, well, what do we possibly have to contribute? What are we going to do? And it was what are we going to do when you're not here anymore? And, Sheila and I are very close and still stay in touch. And her response was just, Sarah, keep doing what you're doing. And this is coming from one of my very first teachers, someone who's had a huge impact on me and who is a bebop singer. It's so important to ask where we're going. Also to reflect on where we've been and reflect and build on where we are, but to really ask, where are we actually going? And let's focus on that future and commit to it instead of arguing about what it is and what it isn't.
Yeah. So what prompted that for the 14-year-old you to be worried?
I think at that point I had just started songwriting. And maybe I knew. It wasn't until I was the 18-year-old me that I realized, oh, Sarah, you're not going to be called for as much for those standard gigs.
Okay, got it.
It's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen for you. But I think the 14-year-old me kind of already knew that maybe. So I was just concerned with how my sound could ever contribute in a way that even came close to the way that other people in the past have contributed to the sound of this music and what it is. When people first heard Billy sing, they didn't know what to make of it, and I think it's inherent to like human nature to be fearful of something that's unfamiliar, and to be fearful of the other. And that's also what this project is about, letting go of those preconceived notions, any preconceived notion, acknowledging your own bias and letting the other in some sort of way, what you consider to be the other, because in reality, we're all the same. We're all human beings. We all need the same thing. Fundamentally, we all have the same values, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about our similarities and focus on that instead of our difference, because then the opportunity to build together is exponentially greater. I don't know.
And I would argue that all of us, regardless of who you are, has felt othered in some way. Yes.
Yeah. So understanding bias, but then saying like, oh wait, when you think you could not possibly truly empathize with someone because your experience is so different, getting down to like the nitty gritty of like what it is to be a human and seeing your similarities in that. But yeah, absolutely. I totally agree that everyone has felt othered at one point or another.
Even if you think they haven't. But So explain, I feel like to explain what this album, the concept about, we need to know what the concept of inner dialogue was, because
they're tied.
Yes. Yeah,
it's definitely been a natural progression. And it's sort of like all of it has signified my human development, just in my journey into more seasoned adulthood, I guess. Yeah. But also attempting to not forget my, it's interesting, while coming into that, I've realized how important it is to not forget my youth and that energy as well. So I'll explain that. Red, my very first record, our very first EP, was sort of a documentation. We'd been together for about 2-3 years as a band, 2 years at that point, actually. And the guys were like, we've just got to capture what we're doing, because if we don't capture this, you're going to keep writing and it's going to become something else. And then we'll never have had evidence of what it began as. So that's what Red is. Then Inner Dialogue was that next step, the music that I was already writing at that point in time when we recorded and released Red, and the music that we were playing and reshaping and reworking. Inner Dialogue was able to become what it was able to become, I think, because we were so open. Okay. And we truly used, we recorded over the course of 6 months, on and off. It wasn't active all the time. And then I mixed for almost a year. Okay. So the mixing and recording process was as much a part of the creative process as the composition was and as the songwriting was. So that was really interesting, because there was a lot of molding that needed to happen there in the studio and with technology, in order to reflect sonically what we wanted, because we grew so much even over that time. Yeah. So there was much more like overdubbing and much more of plugging in and playing with sounds and exploring in the studio context, as opposed to coming in with a super clear concept. I don't think any of us knew what it was going to be. Okay. And we took our time because of that to create it. Lyrically, and in terms of the message of Inner Dialogue, it was a reflection of who I was becoming and who I wanted to be. And also sort of just like a scan of my person and of my inner world. And it was sort of me giving myself permission to convey my curiosities about things that we don't always hear about in songs, in songwriting and in lyric writing. So I was talking about your classic topics, love and heartbreak. But I was also talking about, death and my working with children and teaching and reflecting my heritage in a much more unapologetic and stylistically defined manner, with my covering of Haitian folk songs and arranging of those Haitian folk songs. So it was just a candid representation of my self-scanning of my inner world and questions and curiosities. So that was kind of like me turning inward, and literally with Free of Form, I'm turning outward and looking rather than at the inner world, at the outer world, and attempting to reflect that and my experiences in it through the lyrics and the message and the concept of Free of Form. So that's been the cycle, but the inspiration behind that has really been, through inner dialogue and that sort of scanning process. I also realized that I held a lot of anxiety and fear about what I was presenting creatively to the world, and it was stifling me. So it was freeing to do that scan because it made me realize and diagnose that. And so with Free of Form, it was like, you know what, all of those political issues, all of those social issues, all of my fears around love and the different ways that exists in my life, I'm not gonna hide that part of myself anymore, and that natural reflection that I want to do. I'm not going to edit those lyrics down anymore so that they're more universal. I'm going to try and speak pretty specifically to my experience and my opinions, mostly because I'm a grown woman and I see people that I'm teaching who are much younger than me who are able to do it. And, I started to question, why is it so difficult for me if they can do it? They're being fearless. So the least I can do as someone in their life who is attempting to impart any sort of knowledge is to do exactly the same thing. So it came from my experiences in the world, but specifically existing as a teacher. The inspiration to create Free of Form came from those experiences, primarily. So both with teenagers at my songwriting class, and at Sing Sing Correctional Facility, at Rikers Island, teaching at Lee Correctional Facility with Dakota. So this is all under the umbrella of Carnegie Hall and their outreach program and the work that I do with them. And then also my work with Rise to Shine and the kids there. It's living life with any sort of fear is inevitable, but how you greet it. And I say greet very purposefully. It's not about, how you combat it or it's about how you greet it. You just, if you let it in and if you let yourself feel it, but then also decide that it's not going to determine your path, then it can be super useful. So I think that's what I've learned, and that's why Free of Form was possible.
Was it, were there people who in your life who were uncomfortable or challenged by you putting yourself out there?
On both records or on either, or on Red too, I guess. No, I was always pretty forthcoming, whether it be, or just obvious. There were dating all the way back to Red. Yeah. There were songs, about personal relationships, specifically romantic relationships. And, it was kind of like a who you are type of moment. But and then, having been in a committed relationship now for a long time, I'm always challenging, I'm always attempting to challenge relationships in my life and push them forward for better or for worse. And I think, I'm very forthcoming and very honest. Yeah. And that particular person and also those particular people that I write those songs about who are close to me in my life are oftentimes the first people to hear the songs before they're workshopped, before they're released. There's one particular song on this record called Another Cloudy Memory that is really dealing with and inspired by addiction and the family disease that it can be and that it is, and it's definitely present and has been present historically for me and my family and my life, and I just think it's important to talk about things. And I'm there are certain journeys and certain battles that are that other people are going through and that you're going through, and you'll never know it if you don't talk about it and say it out loud. So I, in particular, have a microphone and have a platform, again, for better or for worse, in relationship to my personal relationships. But I try to be really open with anybody who's inspiring my work directly and who I'm writing about, or in reference to. I just think it's really important to talk about it, because I think that's how the healing begins, both in the immediate proximity that issues are taking place, but also in relationship to the larger world and other people who can relate to your experience and your struggle.
And I guess I ask also because when we change, it changes other people around us or how they react to us. So if we're feeling more fearless, how does that affect people around you? If you're feeling free and...
I can only speak to how I hope it affects people, because of how it's affected me. Yeah. When I see other people doing it, when I've seen other people doing it, it's inspired me to do it for myself, but also to find it in a very particular sense for myself. So what is freeing to someone else isn't necessarily going to be freeing for me. Yeah. So it's really inspired me to find my own journey in that, in my own space. The title track, Free of Form, the lyrics are, find a space that will welcome you into the clouds, unwinding into what you will be. Carve a space that can hold you in all you are, with no assumption of what will be, of what we'll find, of what will make us what we are. So it's sort of like that inspiration. It's going to exist and manifest in so many different ways for different people. So I guess me doing that, I just hope will inspire someone else to do the same. And it's sort of like a paying it forward, an indirect paying it forward. Yeah. Like, let's just all live that way, because then it'll be infectious and contagious, and the energy will be felt and reciprocated. Yeah.
Which is why my grandmother said, don't hide your light under a bushel, right?
Absolutely.
People need to see your light.
Then what's it for?
God. So I have to wonder, the album for Free of Form is you looking outward, so that would include our political climate. And how does the album change, like, because it's songs that started before the changing of the guard, so to speak. Yeah. Did that affect the songs?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, for March to Revolution, there are two different versions, and that was necessary. We originally thought we were going to put the fall version, the recorded version, that we released in the fall, on this record as it existed, and then we realized, nope, we can't do that, because it's so different now. And from between October and now, so much has shifted. We have a new administration in power here in the U.S., and it's so interesting that I just chose to say in power. It feels different. I don't think I ever said that about the last administration. In power, in place, or maybe anyway. And I think there was a moment of desperation when we first released it. I was a part of an article for the Washington Post that they released, where they had different artists from different mediums talking and reflecting about the current political climate, and about making art in the Trump era. And essentially what I mentioned during that interview was sort of like a naivete in regards to what my song could do, what March to Revolution could potentially do. I think I was quoted as saying, I thought it would change the world. That wasn't exactly how I meant it. And I also kind of put it in quotations, but that's hard to convey in print. But essentially, I really thought that, it could have an impact in some sort of way, in some sort of micro way. When the election was over, it was a huge blow, to all of us in so many different ways. And I say all of us because something shifted for everyone, regardless of who you voted for. Things shifted, and energy in the universe shifted significantly on that day and after that time. And it's continuing to be in flux right now, which I think is a good thing. But it was just interesting how disappointed I was. That was like probably the most overwhelming feeling, was just like sheer and utter disappointment. Not necessarily because of the particular person who was now in that role, but mostly because of the values and the dignity that I felt it didn't represent. That I identified as being core in my life. And that also has allowed me to be a human and to exist in this world as a multiracial child of an immigrant and a U.S. citizen. So it's very interesting, and it's very loaded. So the new version of March to Revolution is more so like a call, a call not to arms, but a call to action, a call to not be passive anymore. The biggest difference between the old version and the new version of this particular song is that, or part one and part two, is that the lyric, a time to be passive, a time to be passive, a time to be passive, is something that I keep repeating. And the song ends with a time to be passive is done, or the time to be passive is done. And that's, I think, the biggest message. Is like, well, okay, we thought we could maybe avoid this. But in reality, nothing has been right for a little while. So this thing that we maybe have been, some of us have been crushed by and very affected by in a negative way, ultimately has made it possible for us to not be complacent anymore, and to question our entire structure and our entire system and our way of relating to one another. So I think that's more so what it is. Okay. It's not necessarily rising up against the people who think differently than us. It's like, no, well, let's actually talk to each other and figure this out. Let's actually reflect on how we got here and why we got here. Because if we're not honest about that, then there's no starting point. It's a total non-starter if we don't do that. So that's politically, that's more so what this record is reflecting, sort of this need to acknowledge different things, to acknowledge one another, to communicate, and as I mentioned before, really acknowledge our own bias. I think I said this at a few shows that you were at. You know, my name's Sarah Elizabeth Charles, and all of them. And I am a biased human being. And you say that, and you get different reactions from different people in the audience. It's fascinating. Some people just sit there, stoic, and other people are kind of like taken aback a little bit. But we all are, because we all have our own individual experience. And so if we're able to actually ask ourselves, like, how has my individual experience, my individual life, my upbringing, all of that colored my bias? And if we're able to answer that question honestly, then it'll tell us so much about how we see the world, how we perceive the world, what alternative opinions we're willing to hear and not, and be open to and not. And I think that's, I don't know, I'm imagining that would be a really good place to start. But I still have yet to imagine exactly how we can bring that to into fulfillment. So stay tuned.
I feel like we used to be more open to it. I mean, because now it's easy to see on Facebook, hey, if you don't agree with me, unfriend me. Like, it's that easy. Okay, I'm going to unfriend you. You don't agree with me.
Yeah. And I think that practice is super dangerous. And social media has played a huge role in that. It's also played a huge role, I think, in being complacent within the context and groups that you feel you agree with. Because
you can filter that out.
Yeah, even in those groups, everything has become so vanilla. Everything is, it's like, well, okay, you're a liberal, and so you believe this. You're a conservative, so you believe this. It doesn't leave much room for individuality and for nuance, and the fact that maybe you have this liberal view, but then you have this other view that would be seen as more conservative. It's so important as humans to find the nuance. And I think also, essentially sparking that journey or initiating that journey to figuring out who you are as an individual can help in actually like accounting for that nuance. But it's just interesting because social media is supposed to represent us as individuals and give us an opportunity and a platform to present ourselves as individuals. But it's almost doing the opposite.
Yes,
I feel in so many ways. So I think that's really dangerous as well, or can be really dangerous as well. Because our vulnerabilities, that's not something we're showing on social media, or that many people are. Yeah. And that's a huge part of humility and acknowledgement and empathy. And that's why I think the whole unfriend me process seems to be an easy fix. But it's absolutely not. It's just dumbing it down.
I'm just going to hang out with this group that just thinks like me.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So for Free of Form, Christian Scott, it's on his label. It's a Stretch Music record.
Music. It's the first record on his Stretch Music label.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, explain the whole Stretch Music concept. You talked about it briefly earlier.
Yeah, I think Chris explains it so well. Christian explains it so well. And hopefully we can do a future interview with him very soon after the record's out. But, Stretch Music to me is similar to the concept of inspired music that we talked about in our last interview. It's sort of this inevitable idea that that particular people born in a particular generation are going to create music that is based on and in and inspired by the foundation of their creative upbringing and learning, but also push it forward. So for Christian, that means so many different things. I think for his music, he's put out 2 of 3 records. That he's putting out a trilogy this year, and has put out 2 of those records so far. The third one is going to be released in October, shortly after ours. And I just think for him, exploring trap music, exploring particular rhythms that are so much a part of and have been embedded in New Orleanian tradition, specifically Afro-Native American tradition, and really just putting those on a map and bringing them into 2017 through his lens and through his guise and experience. For him, that's what Stretch Music is. For me, Stretch Music is maybe a little bit, it's going to be specific with each project. So for this project, it's me utilizing my effects pedal, my TC Helicon pedal, as another instrument in order to manipulate my voice and my sound and orchestrate instantaneously in the moment. It's using, having John Davis use the full drum kit, but then also having electronic drum sounds and sub bass for the first time in my music. Having Jesse play every keyboard that he can find at the Bunker Studio in Brooklyn, giving Bernice free reign. 3 of the songs on this record were totally improvised. And that, again, speaks to our familiarity with one another as a band. But the very opening track, Purview, the interlude track, Thinker, and the very last track, The Struggle, which is actually an iPhone recording from a rehearsal.
Oh, really? Okay.
That's all it is. That John Davis, the engineer at the Bunker, took and enhanced and we edited. And but it's just a duo track with just Bernice and I layering and waiting for John and Jesse to get to rehearsal. That's essentially what it is.
Okay, nice.
So it was completely improvised with loops and everything. And, that creating that type of space for me is Stretch Music. Creating a space, where you can explore and reshape and remold and use everything at your disposal. Whether that's figuratively in terms of your inspiration, your background, and your foundation, or quite literally electronic devices and technology to really enhance and shape your sound and explore. As I said before. So I think that, to me, that's what Stretch Music is existing as now. My next record, who knows, could be totally acoustic with a string quartet. And to me, that still will be Stretch Music. So, that's how I'm identifying it as. It's about the new movement, the new wave, and the new sound, whatever that might be.
Okay, so it's more like a state of mind of the artist.
Yeah, for me. I mean, I want you to ask Christian the same question, because I know he'll have a different answer, a slightly different answer. And he is, he's creating it, and he's seeing so many of us have talked about the value of calling it something. And we've spoken about it in different contexts, but Stretch Music is really taking hold, and I think it's important for those of us who identify with it to latch onto it and to say, no, this is what it is, because it will help our audience. And it will help us reach more people because we're calling it something. So to me, state of mind and it's a state of mind and a sound and a particular base of influence in decision making.
Okay.
To move particular genres and sounds forward. But yeah, you should ask Christian.
Okay, I will. And as he is the co-producer for this album, The Last One, what does he bring as the co-producer? What are you looking from a producer?
Imagination and permission. Mm-hmm. So I'm a Capricorn. Okay. I was born in January. On the Enneagram, I'm also a type 3. Uh-huh. So I'm very particular. I'm very organized. It can be hard for me to let go of inhibitions. Mm-hmm. It's something I've worked on, something I'm conscious of, and I'm excited about getting better at doing. But he personally, for me, allows for and gives me permission to just let go of all that and kind of just literally jump off the cliff. I've used that analogy so many times, but that's what it feels like to me. Before, there used to be a lot more fear of falling flat and splatting on the ground. And now it's definitely sort of this soaring that seems to be happening. And I definitely feel like we're flying at this point, and I'm super excited to see where that takes us. You know, and I say that in the least arrogant way as possible. It's more so, it's just like, we're just exploring and seeing different landscapes at this point, and that's super exciting. And in terms of his imagination, you know, he just hears things differently than I do. And I think I hear things differently than he does, which is why he so generously invited me to be a part of the first 2 albums that he released on the trilogy this year. He just kind of gave me tracks and said, like, Sarah, go, write. Okay. And I sat here exactly where we're sitting now in my living room and with my effects pedal and put on the tracks and blasted them and just wrote while sitting on my rug. And that was it. That was the whole exploration process and writing with him. And the fact that he trusted me because we definitely see things, and I feel like our artistries are running parallel to each other, but they're not tied. They're not completely linked. You know, we definitely have our differences, and I think, I know that he's inspired me a lot and allowed the imaginative element of our particular music as scope to take on a different identity. So yeah, we're really lucky to have him. Yeah. I guess is the 6th member of the band now. Okay. With Jordan now in the mix.
And how would you say I've interviewed you, this is the 4th time?
I think so, counting the phone interview. Yeah. Yeah, so phone, twice in person.
Okay. And this is the 2nd time on the eve of the release of the album. How contrast the difference or the same between the 2 releases?
That's a really good question. I'm so much, I don't know if you can tell or if you remember, but I'm much less stressed right now than I was this time before Inner Dialogue. And that's really speaking to the team that I have around me. So we're releasing the record on Stretch Music. It's Stretch Music 100 is the catalog number, the very first record, which is awesome.
October 6th.
October 6th, 2017. And we're releasing it in partnership with Rope-A-Dope Records. And Rope-A-Dope has put out, as we all know, some really amazing music over the past number of years, and are super open to the people that they invite into their family and the types of music. In terms of progressive music and progressive vision, Rope-A-Dope, I think, is the leading label in that regard. Yeah. And Truth Revolution Records, the record label that I came from before, they're right there as well, but have a much tighter community. Okay. Rope-A-Dope is a little bit more broad in terms of the community that they have invited in and the family that they've created. And it's really fun to be a part of it and to explore and to learn new artists that I didn't even know about before, deciding to release this project through them or in partnership with them. So the team at Rope-A-Dope, Lewis Marks and Fabian Brown and Ben Mathewson and Kaya Marks, and it's just a pretty special and spectacular team. Working with them in conjunction with their publicity team with Joe Baxter and Jonathan Kim and who is on my publicity team. It's just really allowed me to be the artist and to focus on the creative elements of the output, which I haven't necessarily been able to do in the past. So that feels really good. And then my team, of course, with Tiffany Ente and Leah Wright Ross. And, I got to shout out all my people and Chris Meese, and Christina Mencier, and like everyone, they're just all really supportive and down for the cause. So it's, it's really humbling as an artist to have people around you that actually believe in what you're doing creatively enough to work for you, and not work for me as my employee, but work for me and my cause and my music and my art. That's it's really humbling and really cool to feel that. So right now I'm just excited to get it out. Yeah. And I have so many things that are kind of like in the queue to share too, in relationship to the album, music videos and videos of the making of the record, and a few videos of interviews with Christian and myself, and audio and artwork and a new logo that we're going to be premiering, and all of this stuff that just feels really exciting and has to do with the creative identity and really the brand moving forward. I imagine Scope is my new band name, but I imagine Scope to be so much bigger one day. I imagine maybe Scope is a nonprofit organization one day that is dealing with one of the many issues specifically that I'm targeting on this record: mass incarceration, violence, addiction. I would love to be able to. I really want to expand it in a way that's so much more than not just the band, but just the band. It's that, but it's a movement. It's an opportunity, I think. So I really am excited about premiering all of those things and sharing all of those things.
and I feel like, okay, so if Inner Dialogue was inward, right? This one, Freeform, is outward. So is that sort of like Inner Dialogue was your control, and this is your Rhythm Nation?
Maybe.
Janet Jackson reference.
Yeah, I got you. I would never even think to compare myself to Janet Jackson, but as an analogy or an example, I should say. Yeah, perhaps. Okay. And what I'm really excited about too is, once this album is out, I feel like the landscape in the world, I keep using this like soaring imagery. I just feel like it's going to be so open. Yeah. There's no, the self analysis and reflection and journey and centering process. And I feel like the sort of these three records, Red, Inner Dialogue, and Freeform, have existed as sort of a documentation of exploration, a self-reflection, and then an opening up to the world. And so I kind of want to just keep that cycle going, sort of as just a method of practice, and then open myself up to a million other things. So I have no idea what what the next, I have ideas, but I don't know what the next project will precisely be. But I have a feeling it's not going to necessarily, I think the circle has completed itself with Freeform. So it won't necessarily be adding to that, but it'll be using that same method of practice that I've created with these first three records, and creating something new, and maybe getting even more specific, I think is what I imagine, but we'll see what happens.
So if you go the Janet route, the next album will be your sexy album, and it'll be called Sarah.
Oh my gosh. So I don't know, Boyce, you know me really well. So I don't know if you ever can imagine me coming out with a sexy album. But let's never say never.
Yeah, never say never.
You never know.
Or redefine what sexy is. New sexy.
Exactly. Well, it could be new SEC.
Yes,
new
there
sec.
we go. So where's the best place for people to keep up with you, get the album, which is amazing?
Thank you, Boyce.
Yes, amazing. Another amazing album.
So my website, it has recently been and newly been redesigned with new content. It has the announcement on the homepage that the album's going to be out Friday, October 6th, 2017. On that date, you're going to be able to get it everywhere. Yeah. Amazon, CD Baby, iTunes, all that stuff. And in terms of keeping up with where I'm going to be, I think my website is the best option. You can also find information about me on musichouseonline.com, Music House, music with a Q, and ropeadope.com, and also through Christian Scott and his Stretch Music label. So all of those mediums,
everywhere
you will find me, Sarah Elizabeth Charles.
And I'll put that in the show notes.
Yay.
This was wonderful as usual.
Oh.
And your cat woke up.
Cat Raj is awake and ready to hang out.
Yes.
And he's ready for his interview, so I think we should wrap up.
Yes, and he has like drowsy eyes.
Yep, super drowsy.
Well, thank you, Sarah. This was wonderful.
Thanks, boys. I really appreciate it. It's always wonderful.
Sure. Thank you.
In my daydreams I float, unwinding with my mind and my limbs. In my daydreams I wrote a countless stream of wisdom. I swear nothing compares to riding on the wind of a thought with no trace of a fight. Ahead is only peace and light. There's no way to know when lay ahead. Better live now or else be dead. Hold your dreams close and don't look back. Live a life free of form, no regret. Welcome you into the clouds, unwinding into what we will be. Carve a space that can hold you and pull you up with no assumption of what will be, of what we'll find, of what will make us what we are. The time to be passive. 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 The time to marching on to the ocean. I feel salt stinging in my eyes. Intensity of the current I feel pulling me side to side. Ignorance and emotion in the atmosphere. The danger is probably present. Will we let our fear rule? Will we let reason die? When we know what we march for, will we fight a revolution? Revolution of real thoughts, revolution of real minds, revolution of real hearts, revolution of the real to be passing, the time 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 to be passing is done.
And that was two from Sarah Elizabeth Charles and Scope, March to Revolution Part 2 and Free of Form, both featuring Christian Scott on trumpet. Free of Form is out now, available everywhere. It gets my highest recommendation. Go to our website, sarahelizabethcharles.com, and that is Sarah with an H. I am online at talkmusictalk.com for podcast information and to stream every episode. I am also on Instagram at This Is Boyce, so follow me there. some call to actions for you. If you like this episode with Sarah, do me a favor and please share it on social media. Email it to a friend. Leave a 5-star rating and or review wherever you happen to be listening, especially on iTunes, because this helps to grow the Talk Music Talk audience. And you can download the Talk Music Talk app. That's right. It is free for iPhone and Android, wherever you like to get your apps. Or you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, just about everywhere. And you can also find the podcast on SoundCloud, starting with episode 100, soundcloud.com/thisisboyce. Thank you so much for listening. Till next time, and there will be a next time. This one's for you, Liz.